let me introduce our wonderful panelists. At the far side there, that's Shea Gopaul. Shea is the representative to the UN for the International Organization of Employers. Jason Tyszko is the Vice President for the Center for Education and Workforce for the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Guillermo Corea, is the MD for Innovation Labs at SHRM, and John is here, and he works with the World Employment Confederation. So, we've got a really interesting panel discussion here, but I thought... Oh, and of course, yes, and they're all advisory board members, which is a lovely place to finish the conference. So I thought I wanted to start broadly, really, because not everybody will know what your different organisations do. So I thought perhaps we could start, if you could tell the audience about your organisation, its primary mission, and the members and stakeholders it represents. So Shea, perhaps you could begin.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting us. So I represent the International Organization of Employers. It's an organization that's over 100 years old. It was linked to the International Labor Organization, which is a tripartite organization which is made up of unions, employers, and governments. It's the only UN organization like that. And so we represent some 50 million companies in 150 different countries. And we represent the voice of business, our concerns, our policies, legislation, regulation. We're at the B20, we're at the G20, we're at the UN, we're in many different international organizations. Now, some of our key policy areas are legislation, industrial relations, etc., but migration, talent, skills, gender diversity, inclusion have become absolutely the most important ones for our employers. So we just finished the International Labor Conference. It took place over 2 weeks, and now there is a recommendation on standards for apprenticeships. Our organizations in countries are representing small and large companies and every industry. And what's important here to understand is there are actually business associations that really can, speak to the global standards, but act locally. And so one of the most important things is we're learning is in the world of work today, yes, multinationals are important, but SMEs is where job growth is. And while we can work with a lot of large companies, we really need to be thinking about our SMEs. And what we are finding is more and more through industries, many of the large multinational and national companies are helping SMEs. So we are also linked to, and I think this is one of the critical points of today, you don't do this alone. And so at the local level, we are constantly speaking with the Ministry of Labor, but also the Ministry of Education, Planning, Finance. All of these groups are really critical at the local level to really look at talent, skills, and education. So maybe I'll stop there.
Project. I'll just speak loudly. So, Jason, your role bridges the education and workforce. So, tell us a little bit more about the US Chamber of Commerce.
Happy to. So, I actually wear two hats. I work both for the US Chamber of Commerce as well as the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation. The difference is the former is the world's largest business federation. We represent over 1,500 state and local chambers across the country. Collectively reach over 3 million firms, the majority of which are small to mid-sized enterprises, and we also have a network of global chambers. I work on our ed and workforce policy team. So anytime you have something happening in Washington, D.C., whether it's a new law, regulation, task force, executive order, I'm part of the team that mobilizes around those issues. The vast majority of my time, however, is spent on the foundation side of the house, and that is our nonprofit affiliate. For most, it's a distinction without a difference, but it is not a membership organization. It is a nonprofit that is philanthropically driven, and it has a social impact mission. So most of our workforce portfolio is located on the foundation side of the house, which is really more of a field-facing organization. So we are creating programs and initiatives and really supporting states and communities all across the country to advance our workforce interests. And kind of the easy way to think about what we do is, given how we're situated and who our natural constituency is, being the business community here in the U.S., we are really focused on trying to create more authentically employer-led solutions. And a lot of our work is about closing the partnership gap. So some of you might be familiar with the work we do around building talent supply chains, but we also have a very robust portfolio around closing data gaps. We also do some stuff on the finance side, which might come up and be relevant. But in data, what we realized is even if we get a more authentically employer-led workforce development system, whether it's happening in a region, in a community, in a city like Phoenix, or here in New York, we have all these data gaps that need to be solved for. And I would suggest there's kind of three big ones: data about learning and learners, data about jobs, and data about employment outcomes. And we have branded initiatives around each of those things, whether it's producing better data about jobs. We have an effort called JobSide that's rolling out to produce employer-validated skills for jobs. We have an effort called JEDX, the Jobs and Employment Data Exchange, which is about creating better data about employment records and employer outcomes, which is very relevant to today's conference. And then probably where we've met velocity was around the T3 Innovation Network, which is a collective action effort. There's over 2,000 professionals, but all working towards the digital transformation of the talent marketplace. So how are we making learning and employment records possible? How are we creating them in a public-private data infrastructure that's decentralized and distributed? How are we producing more robust skills data for use in them? And we focus on a lot of use cases that are cross-domain, and probably the one that we're focused on the most right now is skills-based hiring and advancement, because there we're talking about the exchange of data on the education side, the learner side, and on the employer side. So we are looking at a variety of tech-enabled solutions that can really improve that overall workflow process in a way that better connects talent to companies that needs the talent to compete and grow in today's economy, but also to make sure that learners are being empowered with data in ways that are going to open up opportunity. So lots of different things that we're doing that we're happy to connect the dots on with Velocity, and excited to be here. So thank you.
Thanks for being here. Guillermo, I'm sure a lot of that resonates with you given your membership. And talk to us a little bit about Shea.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, or for having me here, by the way. Lovely to have met a whole bunch of you here at this event. So I represent SHRM. SHRM stands for the Society for Human Resource Management. We're considered the foremost expert and thought leader around issues that affect the workplace. We have over 325,000 members that touch about 235 million employees and their families worldwide. My group, well, actually, before I get into that, since you brought up how many years you guys have been around, we're actually celebrating our 75th anniversary this year. So there's been a lot of celebration going on the entire year. In particular, my group, SHRM Labs, what we do is we support SHRM in elevating HR as the thought leader in workplace innovation. The way that we see it is that if anybody should be leading that discussion, it should be HR. And there's a simple reason for that. HR leads the number one resource that organizations have, and that is the workforce. And so, it makes perfect sense for us to be a part of Velocity, given, everything that Velocity is trying to advance out there when it relates to the workplace and workers.
Fantastic. And John, you've been involved with Velocity for a while now. Tell us, give us your perspective from the World Employment Confederation viewpoint.
So the World Employment Confederation is an advocacy-based organization that focuses on the private employment business, private employment agencies. So really two different types of members that we have. One, at a global level, we have billion-dollar-plus staffing companies, Manpower, Adecco, Randstad, Kelly, Recruit, etc., are one side of our membership. The other side of the membership is the associations that operate inside each individual country. So here in the U.S., it's the American Staffing Association. If you were to go to the UK, it's the REC. If you were to go to India, it's the Indian Staffing Federation. That's where all the small and mid-sized businesses tend to operate, because labor is delivered locally and labor laws are delivered locally for the most part. So as a group, we collectively represent about $500 billion in revenue So it's a significant industry population, about 150,000 different businesses operating inside that membership collectively, and 60 million workers placed every year. And so where all this came about for us was a challenge that was issued it was a Dragon's Den event. Guy Ryder from the ILO was there as one of the judges, and it was a small digital wallet company out of Switzerland who presented. And at the end of that conversation, Guy came back to Elaine DeHaze, who was the CEO of Adecco at the time, and said, so many people either enter or re-enter industry through your business. You need to do something collectively as a group. And that's when we brought together all of our membership and said, what can we do collectively to change this industry? And that's where Dror was one of the original presenters who came to us during a design thinking workshop, and the group immediately engaged.
Thank you. And of course, you've mentioned many of the same challenges which we're addressing, but of course each organization has a slightly different mission, a slightly different focus. With that in mind, how do verifiable credentials directly contribute towards helping you achieve that mission? So Jason, I'm going to come to you first this time.
Yeah, so we see verifiable credentials as a piece of this larger puzzle that we're trying to solve for. So we're trying to look at, who actually has tech-enabled solutions that's going to close some of these data and interoperability gaps for the use cases that matter most to us. So in some ways, we're trying to do this at a macro level. So I mentioned, for example, JetX, the Jobs and Employment Data Exchange. Well, one of the use cases that we're trying to do around the project is to create a public-private multi-state data trust that would be able to empower every American worker with their employment history. So it's the E in the LER, that employment record piece. And while we're trying to solve for this by having employers adopt data standards so they can better organize and share data about jobs and employees in those jobs to satisfy a wide variety of reporting requirements. So what's in it for them? Save them money, save them burden, but then create the data infrastructure that can empower workers with data. And as we're trying to kind of build out that solution set, we're going to need a way to actually move the data to a wallet and to do it in a verifiable way. So you could call that a credential, you could call it a record, whatever you want, but we need to move the data to the worker, and we need to verify it. And that's going to empower that worker then to take that employment history and to use it when applying for jobs or to pursue continuing education, so on and so forth. But then through our T3 network, where we're actually trying to look not just at trying to do those kind of big utility grade solutions of verifiable data, we're trying to look more transactionally around, learning is happening everywhere. And while we've had that conversation for a long time, now we're actually getting the data infrastructure in place that's going to make it a reality. And when I hang out with my good friends over at Acro, and I know we got Mike Simmons here, I joke with them that, employers will be the new educators, HR will become the new registrar, and the LER will become the new transcript. Obviously, that's not all true. It's just fun. But the acknowledgement is there's already a tremendous amount of learning happening outside the classroom.
Yeah.
And that learning is undocumented and unverified. And if we could just do a better job of leveraging the tools we have now to document the learning that's already happening, and to have someone like your employer or your manager make assertions about that and be able to transmit that in a verifiable way, that can go far in terms of empowering learners and workers with their skills in a machine actionable way where they can compose a resume presentation around them. So there's just a lot we could do to really have data working on behalf of workers. And there's a number of ways we could do it, whether it's, how do we actually modernize our labor market and workforce data and be able to move it to the workers themselves, or just be more transactional, saying anywhere someone's experiencing learning, particularly on the job, let's start documenting it and verifying it so people can actually better share and communicate out their knowledge, skills, and abilities. So, talent is going to be the key driver for competitive advantage in the future. And we really need to be creating more of a skills-based talent marketplace. And it's more than rhetoric. You need a data infrastructure that supports it. And we think networks like Velocity are starting to show us what the solution set could look like for how to operationalize it at scale.
Thank you, John. We spoke on the podcast recently, and I want to ask you the same question. But you mentioned a word there, which was a really interesting word in that context. You mentioned about dignity, giving people the dignity to be able to achieve what they want to achieve. I mean, remember to ask this question, but with that lens.
Yeah. So when we brought our task force together, we were trying to see what impact can we make here, and what it really came down to is a recognition first off, what are we doing? We're connecting people with work. In its simplest format, that's what our industry does. And when we broke that down a little further, we all like to talk about how we're moving into what upper level white collar, gold collar, as it's now being described in some areas. But if we think about it from Maslow's hierarchy, people tend to come to staffing firms when they're at the lowest point. They've been let go, they don't have work, they need something now. And so when we looked at it, we wanted how much friction can we take out of that process? And collectively, we went through a set of measures and we said we can take 2 weeks out of the process. And there's 3 entities that are impacted by that. The worker first, they get a paycheck 2 weeks faster. And that is about dignity. That's about not being left in that position of not having income, having to go home and tell their family that there is no money for a meal this week, having to make very difficult choices in their home, whether it's dignity or wellness that we hear everything about today. That's front and center for the worker. For our end clients, it's about productivity. How do they make things happen faster? Same thing. If I can start someone today, as opposed to waiting 2 weeks for all those credentials to be verified, we get productivity faster. And then the third group is governments. Governments are paying social welfare every time I'm out of work. So if I can be back to work 2 weeks faster, the governments have a whole lot less pressure on them today. And so we think that there's just real value across all 3 areas, but the most important is the human dignity that comes with working and having a paycheck.
Yeah. Shea, let me come to you. Again, I see you nodding there to what John's saying.
But just to give a little perspective on some stats, I'm a numbers person. We just signed something at the UN with the ILO where with COVID and all the crisis we have, we need to create 400 million jobs in a lot of the countries that have lost those jobs. And yet at the same time, you talk about advanced economies. And if you talk to an employer, their biggest problem is not finding the talent they need. So just to give you some perspective, 184 million people, or 2.3%, live outside their country of origin. 43% live in low or middle income countries. And 21.3 million refugees face various issues around their legal limitations. And I'll take what John said to me earlier. There are many doctors working as Uber drivers in many countries, not because they want to, but because they have to. So the whole area of migration and the refugee crisis throughout the world is something which is of real interest to us, and that's where digital credentials become absolutely essential. So an IT solution offered by Velocity can help in the recruitment of foreign workers and foreign talent, whether we like it or not. And the American media is wonderful at this. Believe it or not, you really do need workers of a lot of different countries. And if you look at the demographics, particularly in people, particularly in Europe, in Japan, and China, with an aging population, the biggest job creator by the ILO, according to their statistics, is the care economy. And we are going to need people from other countries to come in and help. But there's also, it's very beneficial for employers who really suffer from a talent shortage of skills but people. Using also technology, which is cost effective. This is so critical for employers. And also, as representatives, and most people do trust employers. If you look at all these statistics, employers, the one group right now that people trust. But employers need to be ahead of the game. They have to be in the forefront of showing the way of technical developments and to support others so that we can really look at solutions. Now, when I speak of the care economy and other groups, I think it's really critical, least developed countries, which there are 46 of them, When we just had a conference with them, we realized that rather than getting some of these countries to look at developed countries and just pick up where they sort of started, why don't we just skip some of these areas, and why don't we just move forward and learn from the mistakes that others have made? And it may be because in Africa, solutions of mobile phones, etc., are fantastic, and they're really moving ahead. The solution may be that they shouldn't make the same mistakes the developed world has made and just jump and move on to more advanced technology. So maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you. Guillermo, of course, your members represent the people within those organisations very often who are integrating the workforce. Tell us what verifiable credentials mean to them.
Yeah, well, actually, just to jump on something that Shea was just saying a second ago, and I'm a numbers person, but I don't have any data. But the one thing that I can tell you is that the number one issue that HR is dealing with is retention and recruitment. And there's certainly a large population out there of workers that are available, but at the same time, it's hard for HR to determine, okay, where's the skill level of XYZ person. So this is where we see, the velocity network definitely coming into play and helping HR become more strategic and efficient, right? When you think about being able to, and Etana and I actually had a presentation last week with the SHRM Executive Network, where we talked about the killer app being AI plus something like verifiable data, right? Verifiable data on employees. So we definitely see the ability to be able to bring in a lot of the people that you mentioned, outside the U.S. or outside of these other countries that are, growing old, right? And they need the workers, right? So HR is definitely going to be able to benefit from having access to a network that very quickly and efficiently provides the right employees for them.
Yeah. Which begs the question then, what can we do together? What can the foundation and your organisations do together to advance the opportunities for your constituents to use verifiable credentials?
Can I take that one first?
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, and Etana, you're well aware of this. I've been mentioning it through the meetings that I've been involved with at Velocity, and honestly, when it comes to HR right now, they're at ground zero. They need to be educated on everything that's happening, and that's kind of like the tactic, I guess you could say, that we've started to develop at Sherman, that my team is taking on, right, is basically to begin educating HR about, what's going on out there. What is an HR blockchain, right? Something as simple as that. What's a digital credential? I know that there's all sorts of level, but the majority of at least the people that we're dealing with, they're at ground zero. So we're kind of like beginning the education process.
John?
I think at the core, we believe very much that the process of connecting people with work is broken, and not broken in a small way, but broken in a way that truly requires transformational change at this point. We're still in a post and pray world, whether it's post a job and wait for people to respond and hope that a good person gets back to you, or post your resume and hope someone finds it. And they don't lie on it, and that it's real information that's there. And candidly, the job description's as much of a lie as anything on a resume because of the way that it's structured. We're really archaic in what we're doing, and our technology and our capabilities put us in a position that it should be about identify and engage. Why do we have to wait so long for so much of this to happen? And so I think that the challenge that we issue constantly to ourselves as a task force that's working on this, and I would issue to every one of you, is how do we move from that post and pray mentality into an identify and engage mentality? And for every bit of friction that's lying there in between, what can we do to wipe it out? Because this is about human beings and access to one of the most basic needs, income. And let's let go of the competition on some parts and come with the collaboration. That's the part that has excited me so much about Velocity from the beginning, is the network of people that are in this room. We can talk that there are many other groups that are trying to bring some things together and do stuff in this area, but where do you see the background screening companies? Where do you see the learning and development companies at the table? Where do you see the HR technology players at the table, the end-using clients at the table, the labor market intermediaries at the table? We're all here, and we've chosen to come together and to collaborate. Let's just remember that that's our purpose when we start seeing the success, and continue to ask our competitors and our customers to come to the table with us to get this done, because it's going to take a village for this to truly change.
Absolutely. Jason, you mentioned before that you take very much an employer-led approach. So, how do we drive adoption?
Yeah, I think where we could be helpful to Velocity going forward is around demand aggregation and closing other gaps in this puzzle that we're trying to solve for. And on the demand aggregation side, I think there's a couple things we can explore, whether it's JetX, for example, where we are trying to push forward this vision to do verifiable employment experiences at scale for the entire country. And it could start with one state, two states, it could snowball. Maybe it'll be all states one day, but being able to position networks like Velocity to be able to provide a solution for how to do that and do it at scale. So we're not kind of doing these one-offs, but how do you get to millions, if not tens of millions quickly? There's opportunities we could provide in the near future where there could be a sandbox environment to test. On the learner side, on July 19th in Washington, D.C. at the Chamber headquarters, we're hosting a T3 network event where there's going to be an announcement where a number of funders are going to get behind an RFP to support LER pilots. And they're going to put a significant amount of money behind it. And as part of that, we're trying to support the skills-based hiring use case. So as they're kind of creating a competitive pool of funds for communities to apply for, we are going to be supporting the skills-based hiring use case in a toolkit to really help communities operationalize it. So I think there's opportunities there as well to position Velocity to say, well, what can you provide now in terms of support that we can help share with folks through a toolkit? So as pilots around the country are starting to get organized, they could see if Velocity is the right fit for them to operationalize their pilot. So I think that's another opportunity we could be connecting folks to. And then a third area around demand aggregation, which might sound like coming out of left field, is on the finance front. Money moves markets. And if we're trying to iterate upon an existing set of business models and an existing credentialing infrastructure, it's going to be a steep road or a steep hill. But if we can create new markets with new money and new credentialing opportunities where it's easy for new solutions like Velocity to step in, I think that's something we can explore. So for example, we have another initiative called Talent Finance. And as part of that, we had a work group that was actually co-chaired by SHRM and the U.S. Chamber, where we put out a new vision for employee education benefits. And it was something that we call a skill savings account or an Upskill America account, but trying to figure out how do we create the right product fit for our time to solve for upskilling and reskilling, and to have something like a healthcare savings account, but for skills, and how employers can make contributions to those, not to get rid of tuition reimbursement, but to say, here's another way to empower workers with funds to go and buy on-demand skills. And if we're going to be trying to juice up that market with new money that's employer and employee contributions, maybe some government money coming in, but we think a lot of this can be solved through the private sector itself. And let's imagine if you had 60 million workers, so 1/3 of the workforce with these accounts with an average balance of $1,500 a year, you'd have about $90 billion out there. And if part of the requirements was in order to tap into those funds and to be able to, if someone were to go purchase skills from a partner, that they would have to issue something like an LER or digital credential to recognize those skills. That could create a lot of activity in the marketplace and create a demand for solutions like Velocity offers to provide the backbone data infrastructure to do verification of those credentials and skills. So we'll see if we get there, but it's just the kind of thinking we're hoping to bring to the table to say, let's do the transactional stuff. It's very important, but are there some big bets we can explore where there's kind of large problems that require a scalable solution like Velocity can offer? That's where we'd like to engage over the next year to see if we can fit Velocity into any of these lanes, and to see if they could be the right solution set for those problems. Just the other thing I'll recognize is some of these problems aren't going to be solved through verification alone. Some of these are larger policy issues. Some of these are other data infrastructure gaps. So there's a number of folks that we work with all the time, whether it's the National Student Clearinghouse, HR Open Standards Consortium, ACRO, Credential Engine, WGU. All of these folks are really kind of doing their part to build the puzzle, whether it's building an LER resume standard, whether it's building new consumer-facing products to help them organize and curate their skills for job search or career navigation. Lots of folks doing great work. So would really like to do our part through the Chamber and T3 to make sure we're connecting Velocity to all these other dots, because it's really going to take a community to solve these. And I hope we can move intentionally together to make sure the Velocity solution set coincides with all the other solutions the good folks in this room are offering up.
Thank you. And Shea, I'm going to frame this question slightly differently for you. I'm interested how businesses and employers are organising themselves to assist migrants in recruitment and building skills and connecting them with work.
So when we're looking at the migrant issue, and refugees, one of the key things is you need ethical recruitment. And this is really a serious issue. And when you say dignity, this is really where it comes. People are paying enormous sums, etc. But if we had all of this computerized, or if we could find a way where we could really put this, as you say, in the credentials, etc., these people would really, it would benefit the people, but more importantly also the employers, because then they could know they're spending an awful lot of money as well trying to look out and get the recruitment there. The other thing is, and this is in every country, employers are not always at the table, and they need to be there. I mean, they have the solutions. If you want to look at the skills agenda, don't go to a university and ask them. That's the worst place to go. You really need to be talking to employers to say these are the skills that they need. So we're really trying to push and get national, local discussions going around the skills agenda, but also about credentials. Employers know the economic trends. They know where the jobs are. They know where the skills are for the future. Again, we're trying to build a sort of a network so that we can look at these future skills. But this is also about a whole society approach. So we're working with the UN, with the ILO, the International Migration Group, etc. We have set up the Business Advisory Group on Migration, and there we're trying to advise governments, international organizations, chambers, etc., about really, again, policies, procedures, legislation, that it's going to make it easier for employers, but also for the individuals that are crossing borders.
Thank you so much. So we are nearly out of time. I'm just going to ask, this is a rapid fire. I mean, 30 seconds if we can do it. I suppose that we're at the very end of the General Assembly. In a moment, we're going to hear from Draw. But if you had to offer out a call to action, both to members of the organisations you represent and everybody in this room, if we, what would that call to action be, each of you? So let's start at this end, John.
I would challenge everyone to do a reset. We heard Chimo talk about how many people were doing a pause, and then we saw many of the new organizations who have just accelerated past everyone. I think there's a real learning for everyone in there. So if your organization's corporate immune system has put everything on hold, go do a reset and figure out how you can move it away from wherever you are and start a new pilot. Start somewhere fresh and protect it from that corporate immune system to get something into motion.
Brilliant. Guillermo.
I'm going to echo what John was just saying. One of the things that we've been doing on our end with our audience of HR professionals is we're telling them to just try it out. Do the product demos. That's the only way that you're going to be able to get to know about all these new innovations that are happening in the workplace.
Thank you. Jason?
Yeah, maybe not so much a call to action as much as something that we should all keep in mind as we pursue this work. It's better to have friends than enemies. And I think that if we could think about how this augments and improves and doesn't displace is important, because when you start talking about these new technologies, often folks can see it as a threat. What does this mean for my competitive advantage, my business model? And there's no way you're going to be in a market and introduce kind of a new technology or something where it's not going to impact. how people are making money and sustaining their services and the jobs and, the people in those jobs. So as we're thinking about this, I think we should all just be very mindful that to the extent we can align incentives and make it a win for everyone, that's important. And I guess my call to action would be just go do something. There's a lot of folks just talking about it, and we need more folks doing it. So it was really exciting to see the demos yesterday and the folks, and kudos to Velocity for creating those challenge opportunities, allowing for startups to step in and demonstrate what they're capable of doing. And I think we need more of that, just more rapid experimentation. Don't be afraid to fail. Try and try again. Work with the ready and the willing. We're going to get there. Things are moving. It's going to take time. And I guess the other little piece of advice is don't overpromise. I think the more we can just kind of be practical and how we're talking about the work and the solutions we're solving for, it's going to be in our best interest. The more people think we're trying to blow up the world, I think the more folks are going to be threatened by it.
Contrary to what you said, I was at the UN conference, the Education Summit, with the big leaders last year, and the head of UNESCO and the head of the summit said, please, private sector, disrupt. Please don't do what the governments are telling you what to do. We're wasting so much money. There is so much money out there being spent. So I would say, don't make enemies, but please disrupt and think out of the box. But there was something said the last session, which I thought was really important. I ran a public-private partnership around apprenticeships. And as you know, Switzerland and Germany are the perfect example. So everybody goes, oh, yeah, these are great, etc. But in our country, there are cultural differences. We're very different. We're all so different. And when you look at it, and we looked at the data, 80% of it is exactly the same in every country. But yes, you change the face, you change a little bit, you change the language for sure, but you be culturally sensitive to those changes. There's a lot out there. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's share, let's compare, and let's make sure we're multi-stakeholder trying to come to really impactful solutions.
Well, great way to end. Thank you to our panelists.